video is brought to you by Patreon supporter Scott. Hello and welcome. You find yourself checking out the KAHLES K16i with the SM1 reticle, which was graciously sent in by Patreon provider Scott. The running joke with him is that he's going to keep me busy until Christmas, and of that I have no doubt. So the first thing we're going to take a look at is the Illumination, and as you can see, it looks fantastic. I have zero complaints with the illumination on this scope. However, the mechanism of how the illumination works, I have some problems with. We're looking at a power transformer roughly 30 yards away, and despite the fact that this scope doesn't have any parallax adjustment, it looks really good at 30 meters or so. I believe this scope has a fixed parallax of 100 meters, so anything inside of that being as clear as that was, is rather impressive. We now focus our attention at 400 yards at a steel door that's roughly 84 inches tall, big window to the right of it that you can see, and right off the bat we can pick up a little bit of chromatic aberration at the bottom of those dark windows in that office building. Now, this being a $2,000 scope, you'd expect that to not really happen, but it's a really overcast day and sometimes that has effect with how light transfers through glass. However, other than that, the image quality is very good, and the sharpness from center to edge is very, very impressive. Never do I feel like this scope gets blurry or out of focus on anything. We're picking up a little bit more chromatic aberration, again at that high contrast zone with those power cables against the sky, and that power tower all the way in the distance is roughly 700 or 800 yards away. I noticed this little Cessna flying by in my line of sight, so I figured I'd track it to not only give myself a little bit of practice with my tripod setup, but also see how well this performs on a very small target very far away. I can't tell you how far away he was, but it was a long, long way. We now find ourselves at my home away from home, the 50-yard line at my local range. Here you'll see that there's a very minor shift between what you can actually see and what you see through the scope. Check out the backboard behind the targets, you'll see that there's a good 3-foot shift on that. That's just due to the glass inside the scope, and it typically happens on every LPVO, and to my surprise, even this $2,000 one. Now, with that being said, there's actually very little fisheye to this scope. There's very little distortion of any kind with the exception of that, but like I said, that happens typically to many LPVOs. As we zoom into 6x here, you'll see again that the edge-to-edge sharpness is very, very high. It's a great performance and one that I'm very happy to see, and it should be this way, again, considering the price. Now, the colors might seem muted a little bit, but it was a rainy day, so you're not going to have really vibrant colors. However, the accuracy of the colors through the scope from what you would normally see with your naked eye was extremely high. Now, as you can see, I'm really fumbling around with the illumination knob on the scope, and it was giving me nothing but a hard time here. We're going to talk on that a little bit more really soon, because this scope really threw me for a loop, one of which I never could have anticipated, but more on that very soon. Again, the illumination is fantastic when it does decide it wants to work. Another good thing about this reticle that I really like is the thick posts at 3 and 9 o'clock. I think they look elegant and really help you focus your eye on the center. Again, that dot and that large ring, very reminiscent of an EOTech or a Holosun, in my opinion, is absolutely perfect for an LPVO like this. The only thing I'm really lukewarm about with the reticle are the drops under the dot. Very reminiscent of the VX Freedom by Leopold, that tri-MOA reticle that they had. I didn't really care for it all too much. Here, I'm shooting at steel targets at 50 yards, obviously, and I'm just rapidly transitioning between targets as fast as I can. It's not as easy as it looks when you're looking through a screen, looking through a scope, downrange, shooting at small targets, but what made it actually doable for me is just how good the reticle is on this. Now, those are a couple of pros about the reticle and the illumination, but I have to talk about the thing that really bothered me the most with this scope, and I briefly mentioned it in the unboxing, but let me make it live for you a little bit more right now. So here's what's going on. You can already see I got that battery compartment open, and you see the nice springs that are in there. It keeps the battery captive. I'm shooting the KAHLES on a fucking 22, and every time I pull the trigger, the illumination just flickers. So I pull off the battery cover, and that's all it is. It's 2 little contacts. Vortex KAHLES. KAHLES has a little tiny O-ring in there. The Vortex got this huge E-ring in there. I'll talk about the remedy to that after the iBox. So here's the iBox at 1x, and at 1x it is really, really nice. It's not the nicest. I think the nicest still goes to the Razer HD once you get behind it. It is just, the Razer HD is incredible, but this is still very forgiving. However, you still see a little bit more of the scope body to the naked eye and here than you do the Razer HD in my opinion. The 3X performs also extremely well, and no complaints. Very easy to get behind. Again, very little distortion when you're looking through it. When we shift side to side, the image doesn't shift with it. It doesn't do this weird oscillate thing that a lot of cheaper LPVOs will do. And again, here at 6X, very similar performance. Very easy and quick to get behind. Shift from side to side. It doesn't have any sort of real optical issues, with the exception of you just can't see through it. However, it's not at the end of the world because you still see the illumination when you're in the black zone, and it's fine. You could still use it technically with both eyes open if you needed to in an emergency. Real quick, the fix that I made for the battery connectors on this was simply take out my knife and pry them out a little bit so there's a little bit more tension on the battery. I can't say that I'm okay with that because it is absolutely bar none unacceptable. Uh-oh, what's this?
Pew pew.
Doe, just chilling.
Pew.
She was just having a good old time, just hanging out in the woods. And then I stupidly came running around this corner and she didn't know what the hell was going on. But comparing a battery compartment of a $2,000 optic versus a more budget-based $500-600 optic, and just seeing that the cheaper optic completely blows it out of the water, in my opinion, is completely unacceptable, especially when it was giving me issues on the recoil of a 1022. That's could be a life or death situation when you're pulling the trigger and all of a sudden, oh no, where's my illumination? With all of that bad stuff being said, however, the 1X on this is extremely good and it handles obstacles really close up with grace and elegance, and it absolutely should for the price. I mean, another scope that comes close to how well this thing performs at 1X is that sub $200 Athlon Talus that I reviewed, but this thing should be as good, even though it's literally 10 times the price. Here's another little example of the iBox, but also how well it handles parallax shift at different distances. You can see that everything, once you get more towards the center, basically stays where it should be in person. A lot of other scopes fail with this when you're shifting side to side and everything looks like it's twisting around itself at the center. From there, we move to the 200-yard line, focusing on the 100-yard paper to start out with, but the angle that we're looking at is more like 120 yards. As you can see, it's a crystal clear, bright, sunny day. Probably the only day I really had filming this with the scope. And it's going to look a little washed out on paper only because of how bright it is, but this scope transmits a friggin' ton of light through it. Excellent performance. Sharpness, clarity, you name it, in this environment is top tier. Absolutely top tier. And again, it absolutely should be for the price. We're now looking at a piece of steel about 200 yards, and my friend is shooting it with a 22, and you can see the dust plumes kick up with ease at 200 yards. Again, there's so much resolution in this scope. There's so much information being passed through the glass. It's a lot to take in. Here at 200 yards, the paper seems a little bit washed out, but again, it's a big, white, bright piece of paper. Very bright, sunny day. And now we're moving up to the 300-yard steel, and you can see it gets a lot darker up there. But again, very high contrast environment, and if I played around with the camera settings, it would bring out a lot more of those shadows. But overall, really solid performance. I would have no qualms taking this out well beyond 300 yards. The only reason why it would be a little bit harder to shoot at 300 and beyond is simply because of the reticle and the drops. Again, I just don't care for that. I'd rather much more focused and calculated drops. Even if it wasn't for the right caliber or cartridge I was using, it would just be easier for me to pick up. No scope test is done without doing some sort of tracking test. And here you can see, well, not only the illumination being excellent, but it tracks quite well. Another thing to note, we're at 33 meters, or no, 33 yards, 30 meters, something like that. And I had to play around with the ocular adjustment a little bit to get everything more or less in focus. But look at how sharp everything is. This is only a friggin' 6x, and everything is razor sharp. Zero parallax adjustability here. Yet despite that, it is razor sharp. It's so good. I have a hard time even getting parallax adjustable scopes to look this sharp. Very, very good performance. The only thing you saw there was the reticle wasn't perfectly lined up with the target, but that was just me not resetting it in the scope. Now, one other slight gripe with the illumination. It's not really a gripe, but something to take note of. It gets so bright and so focused, and you can see at 6 o'clock there at the inside of the scope, it does have a little bit of bleed through. But other than that, you won't really notice it. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't done a laundry room cleaning in so long, I almost forgot how to do it. Not even joking. I was actually getting a little bit nervous while doing it too because it's been so long. I got almost desensitized to the entire situation. But I wanted to see
Pew 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 pew.
how well this scope would perform in really close environments. And again, like we saw in the woods, it handles it with grace and ease. It's really, really good.
Pew pew.
No issues whatsoever. It's exactly what you want to see when you're buying a scope of this caliber. Now, that's just optically speaking. Everything about that's fine, but I can't help but think about that battery holder for the illumination. It's just something that the more I think about it, the more it bothers me. Because
Pew 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 pew.
this is a $2,000 optic, and KAHLES does not play games when it comes to all of the machining processes that they have. But yet, the battery compartment is the cheapest thing I've ever seen on an optic. But then yet again, look at the performance here. Zero fisheye, zero distortion. We're sub 10 feet, I would say. And it doesn't even look like you're looking through a scope. It looks like you're looking through a piece of glass, and that's phenomenal. And that's my biggest takeaway with this scope. There's some things about it that I am just in love with, and other things that I can't stop, I can't wrap my brain around it.
Pew pew. Pew pew.
It's really just, it's a double-edged sword,
Pew pew.
and one that I don't know if I would be comfortable spending that much money on.
Pew pew.
Because I know for roughly half the price of this, you could pick up a Razer HD Gen 2e. You know, if you want to buy one used, you could pick it up for even less than half the price of this thing. However, that's still going to be heavier than this, and it's maybe not going to be as cool. You're still going to need a throw lever and, you know, other little nitpicks like that. But
Pew.
look at the glass clarity of this. It's 6x at 45. No, actually, that's like 60, 65 yards. It's stupid good. And that to me is this scope's biggest problem. It's got an Achilles heel, and it's that battery compartment. I can't stress it enough. It was heart-wrenching for me to have to pull out a knife and bend two little springs on a borrowed scope that's $2,000
Pew
and have to wonder
pew
if I was going to cause damage to this thing or not.
pew.
It's something that I am still floored with to this day, and something that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. But I think I have talked enough about the scope. I think it's time to get my final thoughts, even though if you've been paying attention, you already know what they are. I'll be completely honest with you. I really wanted to love this scope, and I think it was I was getting in my own head when I was looking at this thing and holding it for the first time and saying, this is $2,000, and that number just is something that just sticks with me, because this is more than I've ever spent on one optic or even one gun. You know, anything gun related, this is more than anything. It's even more expensive than my most expensive complete rifle setup, which is a Steyr Scout and a Vortex PST 2.5 to 10 Gen 1. So this is like a hard pill to swallow, and I should expect perfection, and I almost got it. Glass clarity on this, as you've seen, is stellar. absolute top tier, no question whatsoever. The throw lever is great. The magnification adjustment is great. The turrets, they're acceptable for what they are. This is an LPVO. I'm not looking for perfect tactile Razer HD Gen 2 click, 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 but you can get that with the Razer HD Gen 2. Illumination, with the exception of the battery holder, is perfectly fine. The illumination, brightness, sharpness, clarity, perfectly fine. But this Achilles heel that it has just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And if you want to know what I'm talking about, watch my unboxing of this. Because when I unboxed this, I just had a feeling it was going to be problematic. And when it shit the bed on me at the range, that was it. From that point on, it was just like, I can't accept this. The glass clarity alone is just like, it's so good. And this is honestly very, very lightweight, especially when you're comparing it to something else of this tier, you know? I keep on bringing up the Razer HD Gen 2 because it is that good. The only problem with that is weight. Weight's a killer. And for a lot of people, that is a hard stop. You're not going past it. This thing bridges that gap well in the weight department. So how is this weight-wise? Right off the bat, I can tell you it's not that heavy. 17.7 ounces for a 1-6 with impeccable glass is really good. Again, battery. For comparison's sake, I have an AccuPower 1-4 that's easy for me to get to because it's right on my shelf, and it's about 16.2 ounces, so 1.5 ounces lighter. And you know what? Just for comparison's sake, because I haven't pulled this out in a very long time because it's been on my go-to gun for so long, Steiner P4XI. This is my absolute favorite 1-4 and has been on my go-to rifle for a very long time. It's off of it for a reason that you'll find out soon enough, but it comes in at just under 16.7 ounces. So in retrospect, this isn't that heavy for what you're getting. A very solid 1-6 with absolute impeccable glass, but that only gets you so far. If you're watching this video determined to see if this KAHLES is for you, I don't know what to tell you, to be brutally honest. I've shown you as much fact as I can about how it looks and how well it performs. So you have to base that on, one, what you see here, what you hear from my mouth, and two, how badly you want something like this. Scott actually offered this to me at a ridiculously low price. A price that I'm not going to mention, but as ridiculous as it is, I'm probably turning it down simply because of this. If this battery compartment was much more rugged and much more durable, like a $500 PST Viper, then I would have just PayPal'd him the money. Here you go. Because this thing is that good in every other regard. It's so close to perfection, yet that Achilles heel is just holding it back from being truly, truly worth its price tag. Scott, thank you so much for sending this in. I'd never, ever get my hands on this optic any other way. So truly, truly, thank you so much. And thank all of you for watching. See you again next time. And a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you, this wouldn't be possible.